Alleluia, Alleluia. Everybody sing Alleluia, for the Lord has risen, it is true. Everybody sing Alleluia. 30 years he walked the land. Alleluia, Alleluia. To all in need he lent his hand. Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. Everybody sing
Hello,
Alleluia.
welcome to this playlist which is devoted to an understanding and an analysis of the Second Vatican Council, and we're working our way through history toward the 20th century. Today we're talking about Pope Honorius I. He reigned as Pope from the year 625 to 638. He's an interesting figure in church history because after his death he was condemned as a heretic and excommunicated by an ecumenical council. Objection! EWTN has an article written by the late Warren H. Carroll that says, "I deny that any pope was ever a heretic. I have researched each and every case where it is claimed and will be glad to answer and refute any claim that any pope ever committed himself or called upon the faithful to hold any heretical belief." If it's on EWTN, you'd think that it must be true. Well, let's look into this more closely. I'm hopeful that you remember our last installment where we discussed the Robber Council. In the wake of the Robber Council and the following Council of Chalcedon, several churches in the East, such as the Coptic Church, split off from the Catholic Church. They based this decision on their belief that Christ had a single will, sort of like a divine human, in contrast to the Orthodox Catholic belief that Christ has both a divine will and a human will. In the 600s, the Patriarch of Alexandria, Sergius, found that the breakaway Copts in Egypt were willing to accept a formula where the Church would stop referring to the two natures of Christ and instead refer to a single operation of Christ. And he was unsure of the orthodoxy of this phrase, so he sought the advice of Sergius, the Patriarch of Constantinople. Sergius also doubted the orthodoxy of the term single operation, but he was eager for unity in the Church and he hoped for a formula that would be acceptable to everyone. He therefore came up with a formula where everyone would just stop saying one operation or refrain from saying two operations. He figured that if everyone just stopped talking about it, everyone would be one happy family again.
We're a happy family, we're a happy family, we're a happy family, hey mom and dad.
However, he was unsure about the orthodoxy of his formula, so he decided to defer to Pope Honorius, and he wrote to him to get the Pope's opinion. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, it was now for the Pope to pronounce a dogmatic decision and save the situation. He did nothing of the sort. His answer to Sergius did not authoritatively declare the faith of the Roman Church, did not claim to speak with the voice of Peter. It condemned nothing. It defined nothing. Honorius entirely agrees with the caution which Sergius recommends. He praises Sergius for eventually dropping the new expression one operation, but unfortunately he also agreed with Sergius that it would be a good idea to avoid the orthodox concept of two operations. Worse yet, when Honorius added, "Wherefore we acknowledge one will of our Lord Jesus Christ," well, this was a direct contradiction to the dogma established at the Council of Chalcedon, which declared two natures of Jesus Christ. This patchwork theology became known as monothelitism. Well, the rest of Honorius' reign was pretty much unremarkable, and the Catholic Encyclopedia writes that Pope Honorius was much respected and died with untarnished reputation. But his letter is the source of the controversy that surrounds him. And it's important to note that the letter was an official and public reply to a formal consultation by Sergius. However, it is important to note that it did not rise to the level of an encyclical. Therefore, even though there were some people at the time who assumed that it was dogmatic, the letter did not create dogma, and it doesn't even seem to have any pretense that it's doing so. After receiving the Pope's approval for his formula, Sergius went about and drafted an edict for the Emperor's signature, and the Emperor issued it to all subjects, and it stated that everyone was to confess one will of the Christ, and avoid using the expressions one operation or two operations. Now, with every crisis in the Church, there are some heroes, and it's interesting that they tend to have been despised by most people in their own time, but history proves them right. And it really takes time to sort things out. Now, nowadays we hear a catchphrase of people saying something's on the right side of history. And it seems that everyone who uses this phrase is trying to justify something that is just a horrible idea. But I'm digressing. So anyway, after the issuance of this edict, Saint Sophronius, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, he held fast to the tradition of the faith, and he compiled a large number of testimonies of the early church fathers that supported the belief of two operations, and he sent them to the bishops throughout Christendom. In response to the complaints of the Orthodox bishops, the next emperor modified the prior emperor's edict and stated that along with avoiding using the terms one operation or two operations, people also needed to refrain from using the phrase one will. The emperor hoped that would pacify the Orthodox. Now, then a new pope, St. Martin I, called for a synod. The Lateran Council of 649 was held and it discussed this matter. The synod condemned the emperor's decree as being heretical. Pope Martin then promulgated the decrees as a dogmatic encyclical. The emperor, as you can imagine, was furious, and he had soldiers come to Rome, and the pope was arrested and was dragged back to Constantinople in chains. And then Pope St. Martin was exiled to the Crimea, and there he died as a martyr. Eventually there was a new emperor and a new pope, Pope St. Agatho, whom we discussed in our video on the papal coronation oath, which is linked below. They were both in agreement that it was really time to resolve this issue regarding the nature of the Christ. So the Third Council of Constantinople, which was the Sixth Ecumenical Council, was held in the years 680 to 681. According to Joseph Francis Kelly in his book, The Ecumenical Councils of the Catholic Church, A History, during the council's proceedings, a monothelite priest claimed that he could raise the dead, so he brought in a corpse, and he believed that if he could just raise that corpse from the dead, that he could prove that his faith was superior. However, he whispered some prayers into the dead man's ears, and the man just remained dead. The council went on. A letter from Pope St. Agatho was read to the council, and it condemned some of the monothelites, but when Pope Agatho mentioned Honorius, he wrote that the Apostolic Church of St. Peter has never fallen into error. Now this letter has led some writers to say that Honorius wasn't a heretic. They say that he was anathematized for being imprudent and for exercising lax leadership at a time when he was in a position to quash a heresy. Well, I answer that it is true that Honorius was imprudent and lax, but let's look at this more closely. The 13th session of the council declared that, along with the named heretics, the council anathematized Honorius because his letter followed Sergius in all respects and followed his views and confirmed his impious doctrines. This has led some writers to state that Honorius wasn't a heretic because he wasn't listed among the heretics in this passage. They say that Honorius was anathematized simply because he followed Sergius. And I answer that Honorius did follow Sergius. But let's look at this more closely. Remember how earlier in this video I cited a quote on EWTN's website? On another webpage from EWTN, they have this from the 18th session of the council. From the first, the contriver of evil did not rest, finding an accomplice in the serpent and through him bringing upon the human race the poisoned dart of death. So too now he has found instruments suited for his own purpose. The council names several people, including Sergius, and then it adds Honorius, who was Pope of Elder Rome. The council states that these people were raising obstacles of error against the full body of the church, sowing with novel speech among the Orthodox people the heresy of a single will and a single principle of action in the two natures of the one member of the Holy Trinity. Still, some people say that Honorius wasn't a heretic. They say that he was anathematized because he was grossly negligent for permitting heretical positions to stand alongside orthodox ones. I answer that Honorius was negligent, but let's look at this more closely. This screenshot is from the 16th session of the Third Council of Constantinople. The screenshot is from the Catholic Encyclopedia. As you can see, it says, to Honorius, the heretic, anathema. Now, some people can try to explain this away, but the Ecumenical Council declares him a heretic and it excommunicates him. The decree was signed by the papal legates, all the bishops attending, and the emperor, and then later the pope. So you see, an ecumenical council and the pope, in dogmatic fashion, declared Honorius as a heretic. I don't mean to cut off this video abruptly, but it is running long. We'll wrap this up in the next one. But in the meantime, please pray for the church.
São Francisco.